Hey everyone, David here today. Just want to give a quick recap of the meeting I attended last night, which was the Parks and Recreation Board of Commissioners meeting. The main item on the agenda was reviewing the outdoor racket sports strategy proposal. So there were a lot of people present to express their opinion. And I will just tell you what happened there. So when I got there, I arrived a little before 6 p.m., which is when it was supposed to start. And outside, uh, there were a bunch of people, and it was as expected, all pickleball people, people with signs. They had done a lot of organizing, so this was, yeah, expected. They had a bunch of they had pins that said "Let us play," I believe, and some people had like easels with written information on them. There was even a news crew from Como, and they were like interviewing various pickleball folks. I was the only tennis person, as I quickly found out. So we went inside, filed in, and the room that this meeting was taking place in was pretty small, actually. So it had like the tables where the commissioners sat, and then the seats for the public were only like two rows, and I think there might have been like 30 seats or something. So standing room only after that. So we got started, and the very first item on the agenda was public comment. And before that, if you wanted to provide comment in person, you would have to sign up via email. So I made sure to do that the day before. And I was one of five people to give comment. The other four people were all pickleball. And as expected, they went over their usual talking points, like talking about how they are receiving the short end of the stick and they prefer dual lined for all these different reasons. Quick note on the attendance. As per my observations, most of them seemed to be over 50 years old. Most of them were white. And yeah, I feel like pickleball is pretty diverse, but I observed that night was that that's going to be the majority of the pickleball community. Not that that really has any bearing, but I'm just letting you know who was there. So I also gave public comment based on some prepared remarks that I had put together. Each of the public comment people had 2 minutes. That was the time limit. And actually, it's funny because everyone else went over and like the staff was like holding up the sign 10 seconds left and they're like that's it, that's your time, but they kept going for a bit. But for me, I had rehearsed what I was going to say, timed myself, and kept it around 2 minutes. So there's actually a recording of the whole meeting, so you can watch it if you want. I'll include the link in the description here. But I went up and I was actually super nervous because I was the only tennis person there. I was afraid that I would get shot down or like heckled. And, public speaking is always kind of nerve wracking. But also, to add to that, given that it was 2 minutes, I had to go really fast. So, I tried to be clear when I'm speaking, but for this one, all those factors just made it so that I just went really fast. And I think people did understand what I was saying, hopefully, but normally I wouldn't go that fast. But got through everything, and some of the things I said was, well, I approached it from like a point of view of I'm a tennis player talking about my experience and my perspective, but I also want to advocate for the needs of the pickleball community because really, as we talked about in the last episode, there's no need for us to be in conflict. And I also wanted to come across as I'm not against you necessarily. I'm trying to come up with the best solution for everyone. And I wanted the audience to be on my side. So I was talking about how tennis is not going anywhere and it's not unpopular. There's a lot of tennis players and it's growing. And I have to wait to play sometimes at certain courts. So it's not like tennis courts are empty all the time, which is a misconception that we talked about. And then I talked about what it's like as a tennis player to play on dual line courts, the problem with the lines and the fact that if I'm waiting for a court that separate groups of pickleballers are playing at, I have to wait for both groups on each side of the net to be done before I can walk on, which is a huge hassle. And I remember when I talked about trying to play on dual line courts, I got some reaction from the audience. I'm not sure if they're like, "Oh, come on! Like anyone can play with the lines in the court or whatever." But I kept going, and then I talked about the numbers. The person who has spoken before me was the one who brought the easel and he wrote some numbers down. It's funny because even he couldn't get the exact numbers of total pickleball players versus total tennis players in Seattle. So he admitted that he got those numbers from AI, and his numbers were like consistently saying that there were double the amount of pickleball players than tennis players in Seattle, which, I don't think anyone has true numbers right now. But I acknowledge that there are more pickleball players. No one is denying that, but that doesn't mean that tennis should be pushed out or that tennis courts should not be used for tennis. And then I said something that I knew everyone would agree with, which was we, all of us, want to see the usage data supporting the location decisions outlined in the proposal. That had been a big complaint, I know, from the pickleball side and from our side too, because the proposal outlined all these different solution suggestions as far as like pickleball only locations, tennis only locations, but they didn't really give a rationale on how that was decided. So I knew by saying that, people would agree with me. And then I ended by saying that tennis and pickleball are two different sports, therefore they need to exist in dedicated spaces. And then I said that regarding the proposal, in its current form, I think it's a good idea and a good start, but the execution falls short of an actual feasible solution. So after the public comment period, the next item on the agenda was an actual review of the proposal by the planner who had put it together, because this was the first time that the commissioners were seeing it. So she went through the slide deck of the background, why the decisions were made, some explanations about dual use courts and stuff. And this presentation is going to be also presented at the following meetings. We talked about North, Central, and South. During the presentation, there were some questions answered, but I don't think people were quite satisfied. Regarding data, they said that the data that they're pulling from is what they have immediately available to them, and that was reservation data. Now, here in Seattle, tennis players can reserve a court, so by, I think, hour or half-hour time slots, and pretty sure only tennis players can reserve, meaning you can only reserve a court for tennis. I mean, there's no one stopping you from like doing that and not playing tennis, but that's what the system is meant for. So it's generally understood that court reservations means for tennis. So with that in mind, the pickleballers weren't happy because they're like, if the data that is used is based purely on reservations, that is only taking into account tennis usage because pickleball usage tends to be more of the open play model. In addition to that, the city said that they took data from school usage, so teams and whatnot, that actually took precedence over reservations. For the full presentation, I encourage you to watch the whole recording. And then they got into a little bit about hubs and how hubs are different than a dedicated site. Um, some of the things they mentioned about hubs was they want to provide the greatest level of service to the greatest number of residents in an area. So that tends to be like a larger location with more courts, amenities like lighting, making sure that the size can accommodate the capacity that's predicted for that space. So there's a lot of information that was shared, but the main takeaway that I got was the city is not necessarily as dumb as people think they are. What I mean by that is a lot of the proposals set forth may seem odd or unreasonable, but it's not arbitrary. It is based on data, and they know what's going on. It's not like they're living under a rock. The data might be flawed right now, but this is just the first step. So they also said that they need more data from us, the public. And that is where public engagement comes in. Showing up at these meetings, filling out the survey, emailing the right people. All of the information is on the main website. So there's still an opportunity to make your voice heard, make a difference. Remember, the proposal is just in a draft form, meaning it's not final. And their proposed completion date of June is also not final. That's like a best case scenario because if everything got approved, money was no problem, then that is the earliest that these changes would take effect. But it's likely going to be later. So, yeah, check out the presentation, go to the future meetings, make your voice heard. Afterwards, after the presentation, we all went outside and I was standing around kind of observing people. And one lady walked up to me, uh, and she was very polite, very nice lady, older lady. And she, uh, she thanked me for providing my input. And it's funny because when I finished my public comment, I actually got applause. People clapped for me, I think, because I said what they wanted to hear, right? But yeah, anyway, this lady came up to me and she said, I think she wanted to bring up something that maybe I didn't mention, which was when courts are wet and it's cold outside, she says that pickleballers will still go outside, they'll try to dry off the courts, they'll still play. And she asked me if tennis players do that. The temperature that she cited was like 36 degrees that they're going out and playing in. So I said, I've played outside as well in the winter. Like it's been 28 degrees, 29 degrees. I played outside before. And she kind of said, like, oh, but that's not the majority of tennis players, right? And I'm like, I guess, like, I can only speak for myself. And as far as the surface, I acknowledge that for tennis, the ground needs to be dry enough to play because the balls are made of felt and the fuzz on the outside, so that does affect the ball. Whereas with pickleball, they're made of a synthetic material, like plastic or something, so it won't affect them as much. So she was saying, if it's cold, if it's a little wet, and tennis courts aren't being used, then that's why pickleballers want to use the space because it's not being used. And I was very courteous to her. I acknowledged everything she was saying. I told her that she's not wrong, the things that she's saying. What I didn't tell her was what she's saying is reinforcing my point of they are two different sports, different balls. That's a very clear difference, and the culture is different. So even more reason to have their own courts. I still don't really understand why they target tennis courts as like, oh, let's use this space. But this is where we are now, right? The dual line courts, they want to use those. So overall, I think the meeting went relatively well. I was able to be the voice of tennis and in a way that didn't antagonize myself or the tennis community in the eyes of the pickleball community. And I think for them, they were overall still not really satisfied with the proposal, but this is just the beginning. So there's sure to be a lot more comment in the future. So make sure to go to those meetings. If you have any questions about where they are or what else happened, feel free to contact us. I also met a student from UW who is taking like a magazine publishing class or something, something journalism related, but she's an architecture major, and she was doing a story on this. So I also talked to her a little bit and gave her our contact information. So all this information is going to be useful for whoever is covering the story. And I hope that I am able to give an accurate picture of both what's going on and what's been happening. So thanks everyone for tuning in. And again, please get involved. And I guess I have to say this, it's YouTube law. Subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, questionable.pod, and we will have more for you coming very soon. Thanks.